Thank you. Hope you enjoyed your lunch. You told me to smile, so I'm trying to smile. I'm going to introduce you to our panelists for this afternoon. You already have their bio in your folders. And we've met Dr. Allington already. And to my immediate left, next to Dr. Allington, is Dr. Quentin Shepard. He's been a superintendent for 9 years. 5 of those have been in Skokie-Morton Grove District and also in Amboy, Illinois. He's also been a high school principal, elementary principal, has worked in urban districts, and right now is serving as a school board liaison for the North Cook IASA. To his left is Dr. Karen Boran. She has served in Chicago area schools. She's been a reading specialist, high school reading coach, a senior manager of 6 through 12 literacy, director of high school curriculum, and right now she's the principal at John Hancock Preparatory High School in Chicago, and she works with what she calls the best kids in the city. And then to her left is Ms. Laurel Beltchenko, who is also a doctoral candidate. She told me last night. She's a veteran educator, and she says she's committed to the professional development of K-12 teachers as they're implementing Common Core. She's also a frequent presenter at state and national conferences. She's done things like balanced literacy, gifted education, children's literature, and then with her doctoral studies, again, looking at English language arts and Common Core standards. So again, welcome to all of our panelists, and we thank you for being here. I think we have about...
But what about Audrey?
You forgot me. I missed Audrey?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I did miss you. I had you down as number 2 and skipped right over you. Sorry.
It's okay.
Audrey Haugan. Am I saying it right?
Haugan.
Is currently the principal, at Maine West High School in Des Plaines, and she served there for 10 years. She said her passion for curriculum instruction had helped to lead major curriculum reform at Maine West High School. I think she's going to tell us more about that today. So thank you. Sorry for missing you.
It's okay.
What I'm going to do is, actually all the panelists have received a part of research around specific topics. We've given them that to read over before they came, and we have the questions, but for your benefit, I've also put the questions and the research on the PowerPoint, so you can kind of see where we are with that. Okay, the first research point was from an article by Susan Watts Taft and other writers who identify one of the elements of effective differentiation in instruction as placing an emphasis on the teaching components of strategic reading. Differentiation is used to support all students in the acquisition of the highest levels of literacy. So our first question, we're going to start with Dr. Quentin Shepard, and then we'll just kind of go down. Don't feel you have to answer every question, but if you'd like to answer that one. If not, you can pretend you're playing a game and say pass.
I love it. I love
and
it.
the next person can get it.
Friend.
And then, but we are also hoping that they will share with you some of their experience around this. So this is the first question. Please discuss what resources a district must provide in order to support strategic reading and high levels of literacy in all subject areas.
And so, and one of the things that I think you'll probably hear, or hopefully you'll gather from the panel, is that we all have different backgrounds. We come from different schools and different scenarios, and that perspective that we bring is going to obviously inform what we consider to be most important. As district superintendent, one of the things that I think is most important as far as resources that we provide is a good quality data management system. And you heard a little bit about that this morning, but effectively, if we're asking our teachers to differentiate, that is what the teacher does in their practice, then they have to know where the kids are. They have to have a really good sense of how the kids are performing. And while I appreciate having the teachers involved in the data process, you can overwhelm teachers in a hurry with some of that data management. And so what teachers need is not data, they need information. Right? And so we can't be wasting teachers' time with doing all the data input and extracting data and run advanced statistics, and that's nonsense. We need to be able to put data in the hands of our teachers, be transparent about where their kids are performing and how they can best impact that instruction. So when I think of differentiation with our teachers, it starts with the teacher's sense of situational awareness. If I'm teaching this class of students, my situational awareness is knowing where each and every one of you are as learners. Well, if I don't have that information at my disposal before I start teaching, I'm just teaching in the dark or flying blind, and that's totally ineffective, and we all know that. So I see that as one of the primary resources, I would say, coming from my office.
One thing I'm going to just talk about is something that Dr. Allington alluded to this morning, and that is resources in terms of books. I'm going to give you a scenario that happened in my district. I called it Field versus Dreams. And one of the things that I asked our librarians to do was to do a collection inventory. What was your collection? What was the age of the collection in your libraries? What was out there? What did you have? And so based on that aging process, we did this through an online product. All of our books had been connected to Follett, and which is a library source. And what we discovered was the libraries in our schools were very, very aged. We did not have some good contemporary things that our kids needed to know, understand, and be able to use when it came to doing research. We didn't have a really good updated collection of fiction books for our kids to read. So one of the things that we were doing back in 2007 was we had just won, believe it or not, a referenda. And so we had at our disposal, through the referenda, some money that we were going to be rebuilding some of our schools. We were going to be adding on to our high school. I'm from a K-12 district. And one of the other things that was in consideration was to also take a look at having a brand new turf football field, and or it was going to be for books. So through this collection development and through the study that my librarians, myself, my reading specialist did, we determined that we were going to go and implore the Board of Education $500,000 for a brand new turf football field, or we were going to increase the development of our libraries. So we had a field versus student dreams. And guess what happened? By imploring to the heart of all of our board members, we were able to let them discover the importance of having an outstanding collection in each one of our libraries. And therefore, one of the things that we did was we had our dream come true, and we gained $500,000 worth of resources for our children to be able to read. So that, to me, was one of when we talk about resources, you have to have evidence and data, and that data was, where's your collections in your libraries? That was imperative. The other thing, very simple resource. Every student needed and was required to bring a box of gallon-sized baggies in their materials at the beginning of the year. And in every single one of those bags was filled by the teachers books that were slightly below their level, books that were at their level, and books that were a little bit above their reading level. And those were placed in every one of the children's desks. And when the children had opportunities to read, as Dr. Allington said, the more minutes they had time on task for reading, that was extremely important. So kindergarten through fifth grade kids, this was something that we really wanted to hone in on and really develop. So 2 resources. Taking a look at dreams and taking a look at baggies and what a difference that it made.
I might add, in addition to the data and the literacy resources, I think one thing that's been extremely helpful for the teachers in my school is that the Chicago Public Schools has literacy frameworks. And so they lay out, it's not a curriculum, it's not a program, they just tell us what standards they want taught when, and what are the power standards, and so they have them in all the core contents, and world languages and physical education just came out in 2014-15, and so we now know what standards need to be taught in 9th, 10th, 11th grade, what the sequence is across the board. That's extremely useful, and that is a resource that at the district level is essential for school leaders to really make sure that we're doing what we need to do to make sure that kids who move between buildings within your district are getting the same kind of instruction across the board.
I'm going to piggyback on that. We also have a literacy framework at the high school level. It's not district-wide, but it's at Maine West, and it comes from a larger curriculum framework first, where we provided the structure for the framework, not the structure for what goes on a daily basis, but a structure for how curriculum was redesigned. And we used Larry Ainsworth's book, Redesigning Curriculum, I believe is the name of it. And it's just got a step-by-step process for going through and providing that structure to our teachers in looking at the curriculum really made a difference in our school, because then we created the literacy framework from that. English teachers and reading teachers were the first to go through the curriculum redesign process, and then they shared the literacy framework with the rest of the high school. So PE teachers, music teachers, art teachers across the curriculum know now exactly when certain standards are being taught, like Karen said, and they're not doing concepts or strategies or things before those concepts are taught. They're doing that at the exact same time. So when a student goes from one class to the next, they'll be talking about main idea, for example, in an English class. They'll be talking about it in a reading class. They'll be talking about that in their science class, et cetera. So that standardizing the curriculum framework and then creating that literacy framework really made a difference. The argument from our teachers was that, well, you're taking away our autonomy. And again, we're not telling them on a daily basis what or how to teach. We're telling them what skills need to be covered. And then we have common formative assessments and common summative assessments, so we know exactly where the kids are at any given time, and we provide just-in-time interventions rather than at the end of a quarter when a student would get a D or an F. Right now we know after 2, 3, 4 weeks exactly where a student is. They get taken out of a study hall and put into an intervention, so it's just-in-time intervention on specific skills, not just redoing that unit again. So that's really made a difference and really complements what Karen was saying.
Thank you. Dr. Allington, was there anything you wanted to add about the resources the district has to provide to support?
Well, I'm not a big fan of the most commonly used data systems in most schools.
Me either.
What I would point to, and seems to me been largely overlooked, is that we do have a system called Running Records, which is an oral reading inventory system for teachers to keep track of kids' reading performance. And what we know is that teachers teach smarter after they learn to give running records, and that kids' reading achievement rises after teachers are trained to give running records. And I keep telling the Dibbles Names Web folks that I'll say something nice about them if they can prove that learning to use their system improves either instruction or outcomes. My hunch is that they haven't tried. The reason they haven't tried to prove that it does is that they have a pretty good idea that it won't. So.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go to the next question, which really has to do a lot with what touches people's hearts a lot, because it's about effective classroom management. And the quote comes from an article entitled Education and Treatment of Children by several different authors. It says, without effective classroom management, instruction cannot take place. Classroom management has been defined as the array of strategies, practices, and procedures that teachers are to use to maintain an environment where instructional practices may be effective. Our question moves a little bit from leadership at the district level down to leadership at the school level. So we'll start with Dr. Haugan on this one. What are the pertinent resources that district leaders should allocate to school leaders to support effective school climate and classroom management strategies so that instruction can take place?
I think one of the most powerful things you can do is provide professional learning community time, professional learning teams, so that strategies that are working in one teacher's classrooms can be shared with another teacher. Because what you can read all the research on classroom management, and you can go in there and you can try it, and it doesn't work in one classroom, but it might work in the next. Also, the resource of time getting into other teachers' classrooms. So seeing how a teacher uses a strategy effectively or ineffectively. So we will allow our teachers to get substitute teachers or peers to go into each other's classrooms to see exactly how a strategy is being allocated and used within that classroom to see if it works or if it doesn't, and then giving them that time to talk about why it didn't work or why it did. that's been most beneficial in our district.
How many years have you guys been using PLCs?
Since 2009, we've been in a PLC structure.
Okay, thank you.
We have common planning for all of our curricular areas, so everything is organized in course streams within the day. But one thing we've done over the last couple of years is we now have grade level teams in the high school that meet every other week. And they do the Tier 2 RTI interventions that are integrated social, emotional, and academic. And we're finding that that dedicated time within the school day to talk about kids' academic and social emotional growth really provides the peer sharing, but it also allows people to understand that the teacher is the primary source of both the social, emotional, and the academic support. And if those interventions aren't integrated, you're really missing the boat. So I would say that teaming is really, really important, and finding the time within the school day for structured time for teachers to work together is crucial.
And the teacher, I'd like to jump in here and reiterate that point, that the teacher is critical. I mean, that's the whole thing. The question is about behavior, but this can be framed in the context of academics. You know, you'd said, Dr. Allington, that there's three types of students, or there are three types of learners. There's the easy to teach, the hard to teach, and the really hard. I keep it even more simple. Maybe because I'm a superintendent, I've got to keep it simple. But for me, it's like there's really two types of readers. There's the kids who love to read, and then there's the kids who haven't been introduced to the right material yet. Right, that's it. And when you talk about the 150 or so programs that are out there, and why are some of them effective and why don't some of them work? And some work in some schools and they don't work in other schools. And if you're like me, you just want to figure out what works. And if you think about the comment that was made just before lunch, that you've got superintendents who are looking for a solution. And I'm cycling back to behavior here, because we're all looking for the behavior solution too. And it's not a program. It's not going to be a program. And when people are screaming at you, how do I close the achievement gap? My advice, if there was one big takeaway I hope you walk away from today, it's that forget about that question. It's the wrong question. You don't close the achievement gap, and you won't do it in any of the schools or any of the classrooms that you work in if that's where you start. Because the reality is you start by closing the engagement gap with kids, and that's the behavior piece. When a teacher is engaged with a child, or somehow has engaged the parent with the school, whatever program they decide to take on, I've seen programs that you would think in a million years would never work. They work because the teacher engages with the kid, or the teacher engages with the family. So in my school, we use something that may not work in any other school around the state, but the point is we're trying to engage kids and families. And when you close the engagement gap, then you can get serious about closing the achievement gap. And that's the magic bullet, if there is one. So it's, you know.
And if I can jump in just for a second, the engagement piece is critical, and it's students on task are not necessarily engaged. Students who are intellectually engaged do not misbehave. Right. So it's the learning activities that are taking place in the classroom that make the difference. Kids act out either because they're bored or there's something going on there where they are not intellectually engaged. And that we talk about that a lot in terms of a lot of teachers will say, well, everybody was engaged in my classroom. And when I was in there and I'm looking around, not so much. So what's the difference between an on-task behavior and a student who's really engaged? And that's critical for teachers to understand when that happens and when it doesn't.
And how have you helped teachers understand that, what the difference is?
Just trying to showing them different examples. We videotape our teachers a lot, and we'll show the behaviors of our students. And we also talk about the activities that the teachers are giving the students on a daily basis. Again, a lot of teachers interpret on-task behavior, so filling in a worksheet or silent reading when the kids aren't really reading, as being engaged. But intellectually engaged means that they're challenged, they're asking each other questions, they're leading the discussion. So students actually taking a part in the instruction and the learning is an engaged student, not just a compliant student. And just pointing out those differences has helped.
Thank you.
Right. I think also when you look at, I'm just going to use a sports scenario here, and I'm going to think of Wayne Gretzky, the great hockey player. And one of the most successful things that Wayne Gretzky shared with us is that he skates to where the puck is going to be, not where it's been. And so what we have to do is we have to stay one step ahead of where our students are, but we have to understand and know who those kids are. That's how you're going to understand part of that engagement. And that's how, when I look at Marcy Johnson and I think about family engagement that Marcy is working so diligently with, one of the books that I brought a stack of books with me. For anybody that knows me, I'm an avid reader. I collect children's literature. I love children's books. But one book that I read that really was pretty profound for me was called Other People's Words, The Cycle of Low Literacy. Why do we have children are where they are? And part of it is because of who and where they may have come from, but that has to be a factor that's out of it. We have to manage what's going on in the classroom based on who our kids are and do get to know them a little bit better. So this book by Purcell Gates Victoria Purcell Gates is an amazing read. And if you also, so this was Other People's Words, and if you've never had an opportunity to read a book called Other People's Children by Lisa Delpit, I mean, I think most of us have had to read that book at some point in time in our educational career. It's getting to know who these kids are that's going to give us a better means of understanding how we're going to manage it. I mean, last night at dinner, Karen was discussing what's going on in her school. She's got such a handle on what's going on with her students that's something that's meaningful. So when you have leadership that goes all the way down to understanding the difference between an expert teacher and an experienced teacher, I don't care if they've got 32 years under their belt. If they're not an expert, that's going to really deter what's going on in the climate in that classroom. Right. So there's a huge difference, and there's a disconnect between those people that, put their thumbs out and say, hey, man, I've been teaching for 34 years. I don't care. Are you an expert at what you are doing and making a difference for children? That's what counts right there.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Is anyone else who wants to add to that? Okay, let's move on to our next one. I think we may have some time at the end to even let the audience ask you guys questions. Okay, the next one had to do, a little bit more with professional learning, and we've covered that just a little bit. But it says professional learning is a non-negotiable for all involved in education, especially those working with our lowest achieving students. Our work requires deep content knowledge as well as a thorough understanding of the standards. Researchers deem professional development to be effective when it changes adult practices and is linked to increases in student achievement. So Dr. Boran starts this one. And the question is, please share how you plan for or work toward providing district-wide professional development that provides deep content in a variety of content areas, and how district leaders can ensure that the professional development changes adult practices.
So in 2010, my school was in the bottom 5% of all high schools in the state of Illinois, and we became a recipient of a school improvement grant. So we had 3 years of $2 million a year for 3 years, and ladies and gentlemen, we rocked it. And one of the things we did a lot of things. We went to Laura's school, and we learned about RTI, and we realized that we had to integrate our social, emotional, and academic approach to improve the climate and culture. But another thing we did is that we hired hired literacy, math, and writing interventionists who were teachers who were part of the fabric of the school. And so they taught half-time, so they were in course teams, they were in department teams, but they were also released to support teachers in their practice. Another substantial thing that we did is we had a 5-year curriculum development plan. So we're in year 4 right now, year 3 right now, sorry. So in year 1, every course team in the school had to create unit plans, lesson plans, curriculum maps, and 10-week Common Core aligned assessments and get them on the Google Drive. They sucked. But every department had curriculum maps, unit plans, lesson plans, and 10-week assessments. The following year, we worked really, really hard to align them. This year, we went to a block schedule, and suddenly, because we had the in-house professional development, because there was a reason why teachers were wrapping their brains around understanding design and really applying the professional development, this year, things have changed. And it's because we stayed the course, we kept our focus narrow, we had a concrete products that people had to produce, and it was multi-year efforts towards the same goal. And so I would say that if districts could take the burden off the principal to do this, if the districts could help us provide that kind of in-house, job-embedded professional development and support, this could happen in other schools without the $2 million a year, the benefit that we had of the SIG grant.
And I'd jump in and I'd say brilliant job on your part. Absolutely. Well done. And from the district perspective, if you pull out from the school and look at it from the district perspective, the secret was in what you said. I think I counted 5 or 6 times you said plan. Like once you'd committed to that plan and you had that transparency about this is what we're going to do and this is why we're going to do it, it makes it a whole lot easier to say this is what our focused efforts are. And then from the district perspective, it makes it a lot easier to allocate the resources. You can write the Title II grant. Like if you're looking for nuts and bolts suggestions, you can encourage people to write their Title I or Title II grants to specifically target year-wide professional development to happen in-house, exactly as Karen described. But see, the whole point was that she had done it because she'd done the hard work. She'd put together the plan. The plan is critical to this. Otherwise, it just happens by happenstance. You get the drive-by staff developments, or you get people doing one-off. They run off and do some conference, and you never know what they took from it. That's not professional development, right? So good for you.
Yeah, something critical too. I talked about the curriculum framework that we gave the teachers. We gave them the framework, but then in the PLCs they had to do the work. We let them do the work themselves, and then they created the assessments. And the following year, as they were giving those assessments and their units were unfolding, they were finding that their work wasn't very good. And they were saying, well, this assessment really stinks. And so we just said back to them, well, you did that. you did that work, so fix it. And then what we asked them was, what help do you need in making things better? If we had said, here's the curriculum development on assessment creation or assessment literacy, or here's your curriculum plan, now go teach it, they wouldn't have discovered that their work was not very good. And so then our professional development was wrapped around what help did they need in making better work. So for some it was how to create a good assessment, how to create formative assessments. So we did, teams went through the training together through Stiggins' work and went through assessment literacy. Now their assessments, they understand why you assess, but their assessments, the creation itself, we don't get a lot of training on that, so now they're in assessment creation workshops. So it's just a neat way to say, my work is not very good here, now I need to fix it, rather than us saying, your work is not very good here and you need to fix it. It came from the teacher level up. And we gave them the okay to say that their work was not very good there and you need to fix it. So they're not afraid to say, this isn't very good right now. We know that it has to get there. So giving them the resources in that regard has really made a difference, because then the teachers really want the professional development.
There's buy-in.
Correct. Right. Because they asked for it.
Right.
I'm just going to kind of add, I think they've said it all, but just a couple of other things that I just want to just to reiterate. One of the things that I recognize along the way is that teachers don't know what they don't know. And so as a result, they are stuck in an area of their teaching that they may have been, it was very successful for them at that point in time, but they themselves don't see the need to move forward. Well, that's for somebody else, it's not for me. But in fact, it's for everybody. One of the things that I was sharing with some of my colleagues here is that when professional development happens within a school, that doesn't mean that that's the exit for the principal to leave, or anyone else that's an important leader or an instructional leader. They need to be in the room hearing the exact same message. Because if you're going to go in and evaluate a teacher based on current best practice, it's going to be up to the principal to know what that best practice is, right, and be in the room to recognize it when they do see it. So they don't know what they don't know applies to faculty as much as it applies to a building leader that is the instructional leader within that building. In fact, anyone that's an evaluator needs to be in the room with whatever professional development that is going on. It's also important that singularly people don't go outside of the realm to get some good PD, but they go in teams so they have something to share together, right, and have a venue for sharing that information. If it's a brown bag lunch, I'm going to be talking about, somebody went to a great workshop that was within the professional development plan. As we've all reiterated, I think that's very important, that every year you look at what is your plan, where are you allocating allocating your funds from. And just as Quentin said, you've got Title I and Title II money that allocate where those monies can go and how you can capitalize on that. And then just begin to look at what the bottom line is. What's good for kids? That should be it. That was, in fact, long story short, I triangulated my career. I was a classroom teacher, I was an administrator, but I was also a school board member. And one of the things that I always kept on the top of my mind, thinking about any vote, any decision, is this good for kids? That was a sign that was on my desk in my office. And that's where we have to always go back to. I understand that if the teacher, if I ain't happy, then the kids ain't going to be happy. I heard that before.
Right.
Well, you know what? The bottom line is that we are here for children. And like I said, I bring a myriad of books. Every one of these talks about what kind of feedback are we giving the kids? Okay? Think about that. So in part of the professional development is good reading that the teachers will be pointed toward that will allow them to understand what is, in fact, what's good for kids.
And I'd just like to reiterate one more time, as Laura said, I mean, as you go into schools and start working with folks, some of this sounds very, very simple, but you're going to encounter systems, I promise you, where they don't have a formal plan together, and they don't know what the PD plan is for the year, and they may not have written their title grants to allow for PD. So you've got to be ready to help encourage and facilitate the conversation and know where the best practice schools are so that you can point them to suggestions and solutions. Because I think what we're all after is like improving the quality of all of our schools, and frankly, it's easy to let the kind of school fall away from you a little bit. And so just having that toolkit available to you is critical, I think.
Dr. Allington, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, our experience in the last 5 years has been 2 county-wide cohorts. In Tennessee, school districts are arranged by county. The first was Greene County, which is a small, in terms of student population, Appalachian Mountain School District around Greenville, Tennessee, which for those of you that don't study presidential history probably don't realize it's the birthplace of one of our presidents. I won't tell you which one, and see if anybody comes up with it before I'm done talking. Greenville called us.
Can I ask Siri, or is that not okay?
It's not, no. It's just a pop quiz. Oh my gosh.
Greenville called us. We got into this almost by accident. The new superintendent and the first female superintendent ever in Greenville County called us and said, could you come out and look around our district and tell me what I need to be paying attention to. She said, I'd love to have the time to do it myself, but I don't. And all I can tell you is that all 11 of our K-8 elementary schools have failed to make adequate yearly progress and are all on focus school list for the state of Tennessee, which meant at that point in time, 5 or 6 years ago, all were on the list to be shut down, with everybody fired and the buildings turned over to some other operation. So we went out and and looked around, and it was one of those things where, say, where do you start this report? Because there was, first of all, the district with 11 elementary schools, none of them particularly large. The largest one was a K-8 school with about 500 kids, but there are several others with K-8 with 200 kids, and just 1 or 2 teachers per grade level. But with all those schools, they didn't employ a single reading specialist in the district, not one. And they didn't have, they had 1 certified ESL specialist for all 11 K-8 schools, plus 4 high schools. Most schools had 1 special ed teacher. And the one that I mentioned that was 500 kids had 2. But at that point in time, almost 20% of the population was identified as a pupil with a disability. So the kids didn't virtually never saw a special ed teacher. They saw paraprofessionals, and special ed teachers spent all day trying to create plans for paraprofessionals to deliver, which in most cases substituted as the only reading instruction these kids were getting. They had a Title I program also run by paraprofessionals, and everything was computerized. They bought one old, bad software program, which was basically electronic worksheets that kids did, and tried to score enough points to go to the next level and do a different worksheet or two. So we spent about 2 weeks, 3 of us, spending all day in each of the schools, and some schools more than that, both observing as well as interviewing teachers at the end of the day and interviewing the principals and other instructional leaders in the building, as well as trying to interview the district special ed director and Title I director, and anybody else who might be in charge of why schools were in the shape they were in. The new superintendent was from a rural area, but not from Greene County. And I think the very fact that she was female and most of the rest of the central office staff was male, and most of them seemed to be about my age, and the superintendent is the age of my daughters, had created some friction at the district level, like, who the hell do you think you are, lady? And the response was, I'm your boss, as long as you have a job. So we delivered a report, and it wasn't well received by the career people in the district, but the superintendent liked it. So then she proposed to use the bonus money the state sent to try to fix their school to fund 22 teachers to earn a reading specialist license, which was one teacher at least from every building, and in most cases 2 teachers. And so over the next 2 years, some of us drove out to Greene County, which is about 2.5 hours away from the Knoxville campus, to deliver courses. And on Saturdays, we offered courses on campus that they could take. But you have to understand, when your College of Education is located next to the 107,000-seat football stadium, you can't offer classes on football Saturdays because the parking lot is where the people who've gifted the university thousands of dollars get to park, not where faculty get to park. And basically the College of Education is locked up and closed down. And anybody with a parking lot 8 sticker that parks there on a football Saturday will simply have their car towed, unless they have the silver or gold Tennessee Star on their back bumper. So it and McGill Franzen developed a series of sort of blended courses that met on Saturdays, but not every Saturday. Not on campus every Saturday, but if they didn't meet on campus, then they did an online session. And it's gotten better and better. At first, neither the school district nor the teachers were particularly well equipped, and the university was not particularly well equipped to offer it. And so it seemed like they spent as much time trying to problem solve on how to get this video so everybody could see it, or how to get it so that Ann could actually see everybody who was signed on from their home and talking to them. But in any event, we, over a 2-year period, 22 people earned their reading specialist degree. And the good news, as Dr. Kirk pointed out to us, was after the first year, 10 of the 11 schools that were failing to meet adequate yearly progress were now meeting them. After the second year, all 11 schools were meeting adequate yearly progress. And Greenville, Greene County School District, went from being one of the school districts ranked in the bottom 5% in the state in terms of educational productivity to one of the schools ranked in the top 10% of high poverty schools in terms of growth in this in academic achievement. So there's been enormous gains on the part of students, in part because the teachers that became reading specialists are virtually all experienced teachers. And much like other teachers have said over my career, how was it that I got this far, this many years, and never knew any of this stuff? In an all but one school, there's been a pretty cooperative and productive working relationship with the local building leadership. And our reading specialists are now offering professional development as well as in-class coaching and observation for half their job each day. Half their job is providing targeted intervention services for the kids who are the furthest behind with reading. And the other half of the day, they're in classrooms observing, modeling, and debriefing with teachers about what they're doing and what else they could be doing. So, and Dr. Kirk, the superintendent, has, and perhaps because of the reading specialists, the teachers voted not to adopt a new reading program when it came up a year ago, but to take the money they would spend instead and invest that in developing their own Common Core related reading program. So that's what they're up to. The second school system is down in Polk County, Tennessee, south towards Chattanooga, as opposed to east towards Virginia. And in this case, it was just one school, Benton Elementary. And so 11 people from Benton, including the principal, are finishing up this semester their 2-year stint and getting their reading specialist license. And again, by the end of the first year, it was no longer a school at risk. And this year, it became one of the schools in the top 5% of growth for all schools in the state, not just high poverty schools. So, we try to tailor in the case of both districts, we go down and spend a fair amount of person hours in the district beforehand, observing and interviewing people to try to get a sense of how we can shape the courses that we're offering to better fit their needs. In the case of Greene County, we could offer a whole course tailored to them because they filled up a whole section. With Benton County, it's been a little different because they typically make about half of a graduate class, and the other half are people from other places. If there's any good news there, it's that the people from other places often get so excited by what Benton is doing. The question is, would you do this with our district? And the answer is simply, as long as your district's got the money, or somebody's got the money to pay the tuition, we'll do as many as we can. So it's a different model of professional development than what I talked about this morning that McGill Franzen was doing, or that Scanlon and Villatino were doing, because this was a 2-year effort, and a 2-year effort to create literacy leaders that actually could solve their own problems and didn't need to come to us as they were planning or trying to figure out what to do.
Thank you. And that actually answers the question of sustainability that I was going to ask. So you actually create your own sustainability by doing it that way. Thank you. The last question comes from a key point that was cited in the 2014 Condition of Education. It was created by the National Center for Education Statistics and published by ed.gov. And these are really kind of frightening statistics. You heard some of these, something like this morning. Among 15-year-old students, 29 other educational systems had higher average scores in the United States in mathematics literacy. 22 had higher average scores in science literacy, and 19 had higher average scores in reading literacy. And this is again according to the 2012 Program for International Student Assessment. We're going to start with Dr. Laura, who I'm going to call Doctor by Faith, to read questions. No, we're going to just call you that by faith. You're going to be doctor. You're not going to come this far and quit.
All right.
Yeah. The question for everyone is to please describe an initiative in your district that supports a sense of urgency for increasing achievement, or that pushes for strong instructional support in a low-performing school district?
Thank you. Let's just think about this in terms of something that Dr. Sandra Kaplan from the University of California, Berkeley shared. This was in quite a few years ago. She talked about, do you create a language of the discipline for your students? And what that basically means is not discipline meaning behavior, but what is the language that you are using across the board in your school for instruction? And with that said, that really got me to ponder and begin to really think. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure was that students were getting a message of instruction that was consistent from grade level to grade level. So that if we were going to use a specific word, and I always use this scenario, one teacher said, oh, today we're going to learn about sparkle words. And I said, oh, great. Well, what's a sparkle word? Well, she says, well, you know, it makes those nouns fancy. And the poor child then goes into the next grade level and says, the teacher stands up there and says, today, boys and girls, we're going to work on adjectives. And the kids break down and cry because they have absolutely no idea what the word adjective was because their teacher the year before called it a sparkle word. All right? So the idea is, if there is a language that we need to have for instruction, it needs to be consistent. So as a result, we wanted to make sure that sparkle words were kind of gone to the way of the dodo bird, and that we were creating language that all children would know and understand and recognize every time they were confronted with it. So one of the things that we wanted to do was to look at even strategy development. Could we create and do, as Dr. Allington said, one really good strategy all year and instruct it K-12 so that by the time the child got to the next grade level, they would know and understand that when the teacher said, you know, boys and girls, this is a real think and search kind of question, the kids would go, oh my God, my teacher last year used that too, which is a Taffy-Raphael strategy called question-answer relationship. So if every child, K-12, heard that language, that was the urgency that we wanted to make sure that happened. Same thing happened with the onset of the Common Core standards. If you begin to look at the language of each standards and instruct that, the way that the park is very transparent. They let us know everything that's going on with it. And as a result, if you look at the language of your grade level standards and your children understand what a central message is, most likely they're going to do a pretty good job on an assessment, because it's not the assessment that will trip them up. It will be if we don't teach them the appropriate language. Our teaching vernacular needs to be consistent. And that's, I think, a very, very strong, consistent message that I want to get out there. The other thing is how the sense of urgency is how our teachers address students and talk to students. If you've not read Peter Johnston's book on choice words, it's a real thin little read. We were talking about it at lunch. It's a thin read. It's also, if you can get it on CD, listen to it. He's got a fabulous British accent. It's just amazing to listen to, and he kind of mesmerizes you, and you kind of drive away and listen to him. But he talks about the words that we use in our instruction. And if you are going to encourage one person, say, "God, that was a great response to my question, thank you," and then the next person you go, "Fine," and you move on, what the heck is that kid going to think? All right? So it is a lot about what we do. So I'm really thinking that the urgency that we need to have is this great consistent language. If we're going to have research in our classrooms, could we have one model that everybody can rely on, using the Big Six or the Super 3 or independent investigation model, whatever it is. But try to create a consistent type of mantra that all children will know and understand. It takes the brain twice as long to unlearn something as it does to learn it right the first time. That's one thing you're going to read in Fierce Teaching by Eric Jensen. A great book on, again, I pulled that chapter out on feedback for kids. What do they want to know? I want to know what my teacher wants me to know, but I don't understand their language. So I think that's for my sense of urgency.
We have 5 minutes. 5 minutes left. If anybody else would like to respond, please do.
I think the thing that the one focus that transformed my school was focusing in on track. So on track is the percentage of 9th grade kids who fail less than one semester of a core course. And so in 2008, 58% of our ninth grade students were on track. Last year, 94% of our students were on track to graduate. Last week, 97% of our ninth grade kids were on track. Amen. Because here's what focusing and getting your teachers to wrap their brains around, your job is to prevent student failure. Not game it, not weaken your curriculum, but get in there and figure out why is it that Laura's having problems in your class and not in somebody else's class. This drives dropout. This means our dropout rate is 0. This drives graduation. In the last 2 years, our graduation rate has gone up 20%. This improves college going. In the last year, our graduation rate went up 15%, and it's because we focused in on a couple of things, and the biggest one that had the greatest sense of urgency was your job, teachers, is to prevent student failure. If 20% of your kids are failing, that's not the kids. That's you. And that was a hard change for our teachers to wrap their brains around, because they were like, wait, I own my kid's failure? Yes, as a matter of fact, you do. And lovingly, as your principal, I will kick your butt until you figure it out. And so that would be the one thing that I would say has been really, from an urgency standpoint.
And concomitant with that, I think it's the whole notion of how we talk about goals. We've really screwed up the language of goals, not just in Illinois, but I think throughout the nation. You know, when I think about goals, it doesn't matter. You all have personal interests. You have goals, right? I happen to be a runner. Maybe one of my goals is to run a sub 5-minute mile. Right? That's a goal. As adults, we understand that's a goal. That's a stretch goal. And then we talk about goals with kids, and they're not goals. Let's just be honest, they're not goals, but we talk about them as they are. And as soon as you change the conversation from goals, which is something you really have to strive to reach, to expectations, then what you're really doing is you're talking about something that's not a ceiling, you're talking about the floor, the baseline. The baseline expectation is mastery, is proficiency. And if you talk about Common Core as a goal, if you talk about college readiness as a goal, it feels like something that's eminently unattainable. And it's absurd. Let's just talk about what it is. It's the baseline. It's the expectation. And that creates the sense of urgency that it becomes important and urgent for teachers to look at. Otherwise, it's just really important, but it's not all that urgent.
Let me make a quick point here. First of all, these are pretty shocking statistics on the USA's rank, the rank of USA schools. Two things you need to know. One, the international group dramatically oversampled poor kids in the U.S. Compared to other countries, and compared to the actual existence of poor kids in the U.S. On that particular test, U.S. schools that had fewer than a quarter of their kids eligible for free lunch scored in the top 5 in both reading and math at both 4th and 8th grade level. In other words, the poor kids in this country don't do well, but poor kids in no nation do as well as rich kids. In the U.S., the gap is larger than it is in most nations. But then again, the gap between the rich and poor is larger in the U.S. than it is in most nations. So, as I said, I'll just mention that once the data were adjusted, the numbers don't look so that you sampled the levels of poverty that American schools actually have, which was lower than what the PISA estimate put in. The U.S. ranking goes up. But most of the people who are critics of American schools continue to use the original rankings and ignore the fact that they aren't a reliable portrayal of the performance of kids in American schools. They're a more reliable portrayal of how poor kids do, which is pretty striking, but not all of our kids are poor yet.
Okay. Is there anyone else on the
can I
panel?
add something?
Yeah.
I think one of the problems with data like this is that teachers don't see it as alarming because it's not really tied to them. It's those kids, and it's not our kids. And so the biggest sense of change the biggest sense of urgency that caused change in our district was doing a data retreat that was as painful as it sounds, and looking at the data of our own, what we were doing within our own walls, the value added data. So once they got to us, what value did we add to them? And what we found was that before we had been talking about the kids who come to our school below reading level, and it's, woe is us that they're at 6th grade, 3rd grade reading level, and, what are we supposed to do with kids like that? Instead of looking at it as in 9th grade, they came at this level, and what did we do by the time they were 10th graders? What did we do by the time they were 11th graders? And walking around a room with all the data on the walls and realizing that we were not adding much value from freshman year to sophomore year was alarming. Looking at statewide data is not alarming. Looking at your own data is what is alarming, and that caused our teachers to say, this is because of us. It's not because of the statewide data, and that caused everybody to start looking inward at their own teaching rather than saying it's them over there. It's at 29%, in the state rather than in our own building.
Okay.
Let me add one other comment here. We haven't talked much about this at all today, but there's an interesting study that Carol Connor and her colleagues did down at the Florida Center for Reading Research at Florida State. And they took a whole bunch of reading first schools in Florida and tried to convince the classroom teachers to follow their computerized algorithms for organizing first grade instruction. And basically the algorithm identified the kids in the class into 3 groups, the top third, middle third, and bottom third. And they offered weekly advice to the teachers, the biggest change was how much instruction kids got. And their advice was the bottom third of the kids should get 8 or 9 guided reading groups a week, 2 a day roughly. The middle group can continue to get 3 or 4 guided reading groups a week, and to find the time to provide all those reading groups for the bottom, give the top group just 1 guided reading group a week. Let the top group do independent reading or partner reading during the time that they would normally do guided reading groups with you. Fewer than half of the teachers actually followed the plan, and the main reason they said it just wasn't fair not to give their smartest kids the same amount of instruction that everybody else got. That's what was fair. This, though, even by February, March, the teachers in the groups that actually followed the plan no longer had a bottom group. Their bottom group was now performing as well as the middle group. And at the end of the year, all 3 groups, the top group that got 1 guided reading group a week, read significantly better than the top groups that got 5 guided reading groups, or 4 or 5 from the teachers who refused to follow the plan. The middle groups, even though in the treatment classrooms included the kids that were originally in the bottom group, even with the bottom group now moved up to the middle group still outperformed the middle group in the typical teacher's classroom. And the bottom group in the typical teacher's classroom, of course, was the worst of all. It had made little progress across the year. But what I thought was striking about it was that even in the face of the evidence that you meeting with your best readers, lady, is more likely to harm them than to help them, the teacher still insisted that even at the end of the year, they still wouldn't follow the plan because it was only fair that their top group got as much attention as the bottom group. Which is interesting. I'd like to turn that around because from a researcher's perspective, we know the top group gets about twice as many minutes a day of attention from the classroom teacher as the bottom group members. So we've actually designed a system that in general in the U.S., because what classroom teachers then say is, well, I don't do as long with the bottom group because they go see the resource room teacher or they go see the Title I teacher. Which often isn't true. They're often seeing a paraprofessional or a computer system. But they feel like it's not I do a little bit with them, but not a lot, because they get most of their instruction from somebody else. And if that case is as wide as Charlock's work suggests it is, at least in Florida, if it's that wide in the rest of the nation, it's no wonder we have struggling readers and why they rarely make any progress, because most classroom teachers are working in systems that don't expect them to do much for the bottom third of their kids.
Okay, let's give our panelists a hand.